The first gunshot cracked through the frigid Montana air like breaking ice on a frozen lake. Joshua Miller pulled the Winchester rifle tight against his shoulder, his breath turning to mist before vanishing into the swirling snow. The second shot echoed from somewhere, distant, sharper, angrier. He lowered his weapon, the buck he'd been tracking forgotten, and turned toward the sound. Through the storm, thin wisps of smoke rose from a small cabin nestled between pines at the valley's edge. A woman's cry carried faintly through the wind, followed by the hollow cough of a child. Then came laughter, cruel and drunken. Joshua's instincts flared awake. Oldones, the kind he'd buried deep since the war and the years that followed. He mounted his horse in one swift motion, spurring it toward the valley. Snow exploded beneath the animals' hooves as they charged downhill. Joshua's face washered and calm, the look of a man who'd seen too much and felt too little for too long. By the time he reached the clearing, his pulse had steadied into that familiar battle rhythm. He was mounted behind a stand of pines scanning the scene. The cabin was old and failing, its roof bowed under the weight of snow. 3 men on horseback circled the place. One fired his pistol into the air while another shouted toward the door. "Come out, Bennett. Your husband's debts don't die with him. You've till morning to clear out or we burn it to the ground." The voice was thick with whiskey and arrogance. Joshua recognized it instantly. James Wallace, the banker's spoiled son. Wallace's fine coat and polished boots didn't match the mud on his sole. The 2 men beside him were hired hands, broad and mean-looking, but without purpose of their own. From inside the cabin came the sound of a child coughing again, weaker this time. Joshua's jaw tightened. He'd made a promise long ago to stay out of other people's fights, but some lanes even for a broken man could not be left uncrossed. "That's enough, Wallace." His voice cut through the storm. Joshua stepped from the trees, rifle in hand but lowered. The 3 men turned, their laughter fading as they saw who approached. "Well, if it ain't the ghost of Joshua Miller," Wallace sneered. "Didn't think you'd crawl out from that mountain shack of yours?" Joshua's gaze didn't waver. "Firing at a home with children inside makes it my concern. Mount up and ride back to town." Wallace's smirk hardened. "You defending these cheats? That Bennettman swindled half the town with his railroad deals. His widow knows what's coming." "I'm not defending anyone," Joshua said evenly. "I'm stopping something that shouldn't be happening." Wallace nudged his horse closer. "What would you know about what should or shouldn't happen? Folks say you went crazy after your wife froze up there with your baby." The hammer of Joshua's Winchester clicked back before Wallace finished the sentence. The sound sliced through the air sharp as steel. "Ride home," Joshua said quietly. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then the cabin door creaked open, and a woman stepped out with a shotgun held steady in trembling hands. Her face was pale, her coat threadbare, but her eyes were fierce. "I suggest you listen to Mr. Miller," she said, her voice firm. "I've buried one man. I have no wish to bury another." Wallace spat into the snow. "This ain't over, Sarah Bennett. Your husband's sins don't wash off that easy." He yanked his rez and rode off into the storm, his men following close behind. Joshua waited until the sound of hooves faded before lowering his rifle. The woman still held her shotgun pointed his way. 2 children peered from behind her skirts. A girl about 12 and a small boy with sunken cheeks and frightened eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said carefully, "I know who you are." "Everyone does, the hermit rancher to the north." Joshua removed his hat. "Ma'am, those men will be back. Wallace doesn't give up easy." Her expression faltered for a heartbeat, then hardened again. "We've managed so far." The boy coughed, a deep rattling sound that shook his whole frame. Joshua glanced at the collapsing roof and the broken window where snow drifted in. "Your cabin won't last the night," he said quietly. "Neither will he in this cold." Sarah Bennett's hand trembled on the shotgun. "We can't pay you." "I wasn't asking for payment." Joshua turned toward his horse. "Pack what you need. You're coming with me." She hesitated, glancing between her children and the man before her. The girl Emma stood tall for her age, chin lifted in defiance but fear hid in her eyes. "Mama," she whispered, "I'm cold." That settled it. Sarah lowered the shotgun. "All right," she said softly. Within minutes, Joshua had hitched her old wagon. The family's possessions barely filled the bed. A trunk of clothes, a few books, a broken chair. Sarah climbed onto the bench beside him, while the children huddled under buffalo robes in the back. They rode into the storm, leaving behind the only home the Bennett had known. The snow thickened until the trail blurred into white emptiness. Joshua's hat brim gathered frost. Sarah stole a glance at him through the wind. You were a soldier, she said. I can tell. Joshua's eyes stayed on the path ahead a long time ago. I was a nurse, she said after a pause. During the war? He nodded slowly. I remember hands like yours. Quote, they fell into silence. The only sounds the creak of the wagon and the labored breathing of the boy beneath the blankets. When the wagon suddenly lurched, cracking through thin ice over a hidden creek, Sarah screamed. Joshua grabbed the res, shouting, "Ya Holden!" The horses bucked as the wheel split through the ice. The wagon tipped dangerously, sending snow and wood flying. Thomas, Sarah cried as her son slid toward the edge. Joshua dove across the bench, seizing the boy's coat just as he was about to fall. His muscles strained as he pulled him back, Sarah clutching his belt for balance. The wheels snapped with a deafening crack, and the wagon collapsed into the snow. Joshua was on his feet, instantly lifting the shivering boy into his arms. We walk from here. Sarah nodded, gripping Emma's hand. I'm stronger than I look. You'll need to be, Joshua said. They pushed into the blizzard on foot, 3 mi from safety, one breath at a time. Snow reached their knees, the wind biting their faces raw. Joshua carried Thomas close to his chest, his body shielding the boy from the cold. He began counting his steps. It was an old soldier's trick. Measure distance, note exhaustion. 2,000 steps to home. 2,000 between life and death. At 1,000 the storm eased. Stars shone cold and bright above. That's Orion's belt, Joshua told the boy softly. 3 stars in a row. Some call it the cowboy's rope. Thomas's voice was faint but steady. P showed Meth that one. Said it would lead us home. Joshua felt something stir in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. Hope. By the time they reached the ranch house, the wind had dropped toe whisper. Light glowed through the frosted windows and the smell of smoke promised warmth. Joshua carried the boy through the door, setting him before the fire. Sarah followed, her face streaked with tears. She didn't bother to hide. Thank you, she whispered. Joshua only nodded, stoking the flames higher. The warmth spread through the room, banishing the cold, but not the storm still raging in each of their hearts. Dawn broke over the Montana wilderness in dull silver light. Snow still clung to the windows of Joshua's ranch house, muting the world outside. Inside, the fire had burned low through the night. Sarah Bennett sat close to it, her son wrapped in blankets across her lap. The boy's breathing had steadied, though every few minutes a faintly escaped his chest. Emma slept nearby on a makeshift cot, her small hand curled protectively around her brother's. Joshua moved quietly about the room, his steps deliberate. He'd been up before sunrise, feeding the horses, checking the fences, keeping his mind busy so it didn't drift toward old ghosts. When he returned, Sarah looked up at him with tired eyes. He's resting, she said softly. The warmth helped. Joshua nodded, setting his hate in a peg by the door. You should rest too. I will, she hesitated. Thank you for last night. He poured 2 cups of coffee, setting one before her. Anyone would have done the same. Sarah's gaze met his over the steaming cup. No, not everyone would have faced Judge Wallace's son with a rifle. Not after what folks say about you. Joshua didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the window where frost traced the glass like spiderweb. People talk because it gives them something to do. She studied him a moment longer. You lost someone. Joshua's hand tightened around his cup. My wife and son. Winter took them. Same kind of storm. A silence filled the room, heavy but not cold. Sarah reached for the kettle to pour more water over the fire. I lost my husband in Thiemens, she said quietly. They called it an accident, but I never believed that. He'd started asking questions about the railroad's land deals. After he died, Wallace made sure we were run out of town. Joshua looked up sharply. You think Wallace had him killed? Sarah nodded once. I think power makes some men feel like God. And Michael stopped bowing to them. Before Joshua could respond, a hard pounding rattled the door. He was already moving, rifle in hand, as Sarah pulled her children close. Through the frost-blurred glass, 3 shapes loomed outside, one broad and commanding. Stay with the kids, Joshua said quietly, then opened the door. Judge Thaddeus Wallace stood on the porch, snow dusting his coat like ash. Behind him were Sheriff Thompson and another man Joshua didn't recognize. Miller. The judge greeted, his voice smooth but cold. We know the Bennett woman's here. Best hand her over before this becomes unpleasant. Joshua's face remained unreadable. Mrs. Bennett and her children are my guests. They'll stay until the weather clears. Wallace stepped inside without invitation, bringing a gust of icy air with him. Guests, you say? Harboring fugitives is a dangerous hobby, son. You've already lost one family. I'd hate for you to make it a habit. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Joshua's eyes. Joshua's patience frayed. Get out of my house. Wallace's smirk widened. Your sense of justice is admirable, Miller, but misplaced. Her husband was a thief, her name stained, and she's lucky. I haven't ordered her jailed already. Joshua's voice dropped low. You'll order nothing here. The tension in the room thickened. Then Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, her children peeking from behind her. Judge Wallace, she said calmly, you've made your threats already. If you want me in court, you'll find me there when the storm clears. But you'll not take me tonight. Wallace's eyes narrowed. You think hiding behind this broken soldier makes you safe? You're mistaken. Joshua's jaw clenched, but he forced his voice to remain calm. You've said your piece, Judge. Now leave. For a long moment, Noon moved. Then Wallace straightened his coat and turned toward the door. Very well, Miller. You've made an enemy tonight, and enemies of mine tend not to live long in Pine Creek. He paused, his gaze landing on a woman's shawl hanging by the door. Rebecca's. A cruel smile curved his lips. Still keeping tokens of the dead, I see. Careful. You'll be joining them soon enough. Joshua didn't speak, but the quiet fury in his eyes made even the judge take a step back. When the door finally shut behind them, the silence was deafening. Joshua stood motionless, staring at the fire until his breathing slowed. Then he turned to Sarah. They won't stop, he said simply. Not until they've ruined you or worse. Sarah moved to the table, her face pale, but resolute. Then we face them. Joshua rubbed a hand over his jaw. You don't know what Wallace is capable of. I know exactly what he's capable of, she said. He already took my husband. Joshua studied her for a long moment. In Heres, he saw no fear, only the same quiet determination that once burned in his wife's before the war, took everything from them both. Then we fight smart, he said finally. That night the storm returned. Snow lashed against the windows as the fire cast long, restless shadows across the walls. Sarah sat beside Thomas, stroking his hair as he slept. Joshua tended the flames, lost in thought. You shouldn't have done it, she said suddenly, posting bond for me. You've risked your ranch. Joshua poked the fire, sparks flaring. I've lost enough in this life to Nolan's not worth much if you can't sleep at night. Quote. Sarah smiled faintly. You talk like a preacher. He gave a low chuckle. If I did, the Lord would have struck me down long ago. A moment passed, quiet but full. Sarah looked toward him again. Why help us, really? Joshua met her gaze because someone should have helped my family when they could. Neither spoke again for a long time. The fire's glow softened. The storm's roar faded to a dull hum. Joshua leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the shawl by the door, the last reminder of Rebecca. His hand found Thesmol gold ring he still kept in his pocket, its surface worn smooth by years of regret. Your wife? Sarah asked gently, following his gaze. He nodded. Rebecca, gone 3 winters now. Sarah stirred the embers, her voice soft but steady. I still keep Michael's pocket watch. Doesn't work anymore, but Thomas likes to hold it. Joshua's expression shifted. You both hold on to ghosts. Maybe, Sarah said. Or maybe we just remember what love looked like before the world turned mean. Outside, the wind screamed like a living thing. Inside, the warmth grew steady again, holding them both in fragile calm. Joshua looked at Sarah. Really looked at her. The woman who had walked through hell and still stood tall. For the first time in years, something alive stirred inside him. Not grief, not anger, something quieter but stronger. Before he could speak, another sound broke the moment. Heavy fists pounding on the door. Sarah's head snapped up, fear flashing in her eyes. Joshua rose, taking the rifle from the wall. Through the frosted glass, 3 figures waited outside, shapes moving against the snow. Joshua's grip tightened around the weapon. Stay with the children, he murmured, voice steady as stone. Because this time the fight was coming straight to his door. The pounding at the door grew louder. Joshua steadied his rifle and motioned for Sarah to keep the children back. When he swung the door open, 3 riders filled the porch. Judge Wallace, Sheriff Thompson, and a stranger whose face looked carved from stone. Snow swirled around them and the cold rushed inside like a ghost. Evening, Miller, Wallace said, his tone oily and measured. We know you've got the Bennett woman. This is your last chance to hand her over before things get ugly. Joshua didn't flinch. Mrs. Bennett and her children are under my roof. They'll leave when the weather clears. You can take that up with the Lord or the law, whichever listens first. The judge stepped forward, voice rising. You're harboring fugitives. Michael Bennett stole from the railroad and his family benefited. You're aiding criminals. Joshua's jaw tightened. No, I'm sheltering people. There's a difference. The stranger beside Wallace shifted, his hand resting on his revolver. Sheriff Thompson's eyes flickered uneasily between them. Think careful, Miller, Wallace warned. You've already lost one family. Don't lose what's left of your sanity, too. Joshua's patience snapped. Get off my land. Wallace smirked. You've made an enemy, Miller. Pine Creek's small, and winter hides a lot of accidents. Joshua opened the door wider, the barrel of his rifle visible in the firelight. Then make sure you don't have one on your ride home. For a tense moment, Noon moved. Then Wallace stepped back, his expression cold. You'll regret this. He turned to leave, the sheriff trailing after him. The stranger lingered a moment longer, eyes locked on Joshua's face before following into the snow. When they were gone, Joshua bolted the door and turned to Sarah. They'll be back, and next time they won't come talking. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she touched the shotgun leaning by the wall. What do we do? Joshua's voice was calm, steady, the way it had been when he'd led men through cannon fire. We prepare. By the next evening, the storm had eased, leaving the land quiet and still under a hard white sky. Joshua rode to the barn with Sarah following close behind. He showed her how to check the saddles where the rifles were kept and how to load the old double-barrel shotgun. Ever one of these? Inside that little church, surrounded by warmth and the first fragile sense of peace in years, Joshua Miller finally felt the weight of loneliness lift. And for the widow and her children, the man who'd once lived like a ghost had become their reason to start.